Welcome, everyone. This is Real Talk with Ryan. We are excited. Today is August 19th, and we are here with our very special guest, Brian Jackson. Brian Jackson's from Sandler Training. And Brian, welcome. Thank you for being here. As I've gotten to know you over the past couple months, it's not only exciting to learn about the product that you deliver and the value you create for the clients that you train, but also your commitment to the community and trying to leave it a better place than where you found it. And so I have been impressed with that. And I know everyone today on the call and also everyone watching later will feel the same way when they're done hearing your story. So Brian, with that, thank you for being here. We're excited to have you and welcome to Real Talk. First question, what's Sandler Training? What is that? Talk to us about what you're doing.
Well, first of all, Ryan, thank you for having me. And those are really kind words, but if we could all collectively lower our expectations, that would be great. Just take them from like what's probably a 6 or a 7, take them to like a 3, and we'll start from there. But no, Sandler Training is a global brand. It's a global organization. It's been around for 50 years or so, started by a guy named David Sandler. And what we do, there's about 250 franchises around the world. I'm the franchise for here in Southern California, and we work with companies that are frustrated with not having enough business in their pipeline. They're concerned that it takes too long to get deals done, and what crosses the finish line and gets done, sometimes they get aggravated by having to discount and compromise margins. So we work with sales and sales leadership to fix those problems. I kind of compare what my program is to like a boxing gym. For salespeople and sales leaders. They come to my gym to stay sharp with their sales skills. So,
what prompted you to jump from being in the professional world? And I know your story takes you on a long route, and so I'm going to ask you a little bit about that. But first, let's start with being an entrepreneur, because being able to sell stuff or teach people to sell stuff is different than running your own franchise. What went into that decision process, and what's that been like for you building out your own franchise enterprise?
Yeah, it's been, the most terrifying and testing experience of my life. I've had other challenges in my life. We might get into some of that in this hour. But the reason why it was probably the most challenging is that business and sales has never been difficult to me, and this was extremely difficult to start this company. So what led to that was that I was dragged kicking and screaming into a Sandler training room about 15 years ago, and as I rose the ranks in my career and began to be faced with choices about what direction I go, I more and more wanted to be my own man and have my own business and not have to rely as much on corporate America. And I had to sort of assess, what are my skills? What can I do? So I called my old Sandler trainer and I said, like, what does it look like to do what you do? I liked what you did, and I think I can do what you do. And we talked about it, and it went from there. So
what's been different than you expected? Because doing the work is the fun part. Running the enterprise is the hard part. So what's been surprising to you about running your own business? It's not what you would have expected.
What's surprising to me, the biggest surprise was because in my previous life, I was closing orders from hospital systems for up to $4 million. That was fairly easy for me because it wasn't any person's individual money. It was just company money. But for me to ask a person, a business owner, to write a check, or an individual, I found that much harder. It was an issue in my head that, am I worth this? And is this right? Is it okay? And I had to overcome a lot of beliefs to become comfortable with it. It took a long time.
You and I talked, and I've sat through the trainings with you, and I've gotten a lot out of them, and I know people that are in those meetings get a lot out of them. But one of the things you've talked about is, as you've gone through your life journey, and I'm kind of going to ask you a little bit about that path, but the phrase you used to me is letting go. And that means a lot to different people. Talk us through that journey and what letting go meant to you.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Ryan. You know, we'd have to go back, first of all, to what letting go meant to me from sort of a spiritual perspective. Uh, I remember I was raised in the Bible Belt. I grew up in Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian churches, and my mother especially really led the charge on that. And I remember as a young adult, her saying to me at one point, she goes, you know, someday, Brian, you're going to be brought to your knees. And I said, you know, Mom, if that's the way that your God works, bringing people to their knees, no, thank you. You know, but she was right. About, I don't know, 7 years ago, my son, you know, experienced seizures and ended up having to have a brain surgery to take care of some of these angiomas in his head, and he's had 3 subsequent ones. So he's had a total of 4 of these operations, and it was through those experiences that I had to let go. I had to accept that I don't have any control over what happens in this world around me. You know, there's a higher power out there that I have to trust in and put my faith in, and that's the only way I could get through those experiences. And I'm a very spiritual person, but what I didn't realize at that time was that I still, as far as business was concerned, felt like I had total control, you know, because that was where, you know, my skills were. And so when I bought this franchise, it was very humbling. It was very humbling. And what I realized was that throughout those 15 years since I was sort of indoctrinated in Sandler, I had sort of eaten from the Sandler buffet. You know, I knew Sandler was good. I was a proponent of it, but I wasn't really living the system purely the way that you have to if you're a coach and a salesperson of this product. And what I found was that after about 6 to 12 months in and struggling to sell Sandler training, I had to let go. I had to let go of all the things that I'd been doing for 20 years, and I had to trust in a system. And an interesting thing happened. I began to feel less stressed out because, and it doesn't mean that I don't pre-call plan and think about conversations before I go into them and who am I talking to, et cetera. But the amount of stress over, Brian, it's up to you to go in and convert this deal, that's out the window, because what I do now, executing this system properly, is I just am there to guide them as an expert down a path of their own self-discovery. And it's up to them. It's not for me, it's for them. It's up to them to determine, do they have the issues that we fix? Is it important for them to fix them? And that's a financial conversation. It's a time question. And if it's not important to them, we close the file, we move on. And that sometimes is the right thing to do. It's the best thing to do. But I sleep much better at night, and the results are much better doing it the Sandler way, trusting that system, letting go. That's a long answer to your question, but does that make sense?
Yeah, part of letting go is, you know, you've got all these barriers that you throw up, right? And those are the things that keep you from advancing, right? It holds your business back. And you talked about overcoming your own limiting self-beliefs, right? And so in this letting go idea, you'd have to let go those limits, those questions over your capabilities or your value. What are some of the things you did for you to help you get past that? Because I think we all relate to this, you know, the imposter syndrome. Am I really good enough to be in this spot? Are you really taking my advice? Do you really want to hear what I have to say? I'm not really worth it. I'm just a person just like you. I'm probably less valuable than you. You know, and that's all negotiation happening in our own heads.
Right.
So how did you talked about those limits. How did you get past them? Even knowing that they still come up, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's so many things that, like, directions that we could go with what you just said. You know, there's a moment in every single session I teach where at some point I start to lose my thought, and I think in that critical ego in my head says, Brian, they're going to find out you're a complete and total utter fraud. And and how do you get past that? You know, that you get past that. There's a great, gosh, what's the name of the author of that book? But I'll think of it before we're done here. But meditation is huge, right? Being able to recognize thoughts and put them just on a shelf and just look at them as what they are. They're just thoughts. They're not real. And getting better at that has been absolutely critical. So I meditate at least once a day. But you don't have to meditate and be in position and you can practice meditation just through, and I think the intent is to practice it, mindfulness through daily life. But that's probably the most critical technique. Journaling is also important, Ryan. Like, you know, having a mindset of abundance and gratitude is really important. Something that really hit me was that, you know, I'm from Texas, and where I grew up, you know, the neighborhood I grew up in, it was a nice neighborhood, and the house I grew up in was bigger than the one I live in now, but it cost 1/4 the amount of money. And so I've always lived in the neighborhood. I live in Tierra Santa. It's a nice community, but I've always looked at my community and compared it to Texas and says, well, but it's not as nice as where I grew up. And when this COVID thing happened, we started to do things like just walking around the neighborhood and just enjoying the scenery that's right here in my backyard. And I told my wife, it's like, you know what? This pandemic and the quarantine's been really interesting because I've never fully appreciated what I have. And I love what I have, and I'm grateful for what I have. You know, and that's, I don't know why that's so hard, but even when we're in a low place, we still have a lot to be grateful for, you know?
Yeah, Larry's one of he's on the call today, and in his when he was a guest on the show a few weeks back, he talked about being in Africa with his family and seeing people who have, in this country, how we define as less than anyone we've ever seen, or be poorer than anyone we've ever been around, but more content, more happy, you know, living in a state of this abundance that you talked about than anybody ever does here. How do you keep a perspective? And maybe, you know, you talked about, you know, meditating. Maybe it's a mantra you use when you meditate. Maybe it's something. How do you keep that perspective? Because, man, it's so easy to compare. Just like you're talking about, well, it's not as good as, well, I wish if only I could. Why couldn't I just build a business like Bill Gates? You know, those kinds of things, which is derailing when you think about that we do really live in a state of abundance. How do you do that?
Well, I'm a product of our product every day. And our product, Sandler, is based on a philosophy of psychology, transactional analysis, which talks about parent, adult, child ego states. And the answer to your question is that it's a heightened self-awareness of when you're hearing these thoughts, recognizing, is that coming from my critical parent? Is that my critical parent? And I have a really high critical parent. And I love my mother dearly. I call her every Sunday at 7 o'clock every week, but she's the culprit here. She defaults to a negative outlook on everything in life. And she's a very loving and kind person. You would never think that because she's an angel. She's really an angel of a person. But sometimes we'll be in a conversation and I'll tell her something that's going on in my life, and she'll just immediately say, but, well, have you thought about this though that could happen? And it's some sort of a possible negative outcome. And I say, you know, I'm going to stay out of future events, and I'm also going to stay away from the past, and I'm going to steer away from things that I can't control, Mom, but thank you. You know, and I've started to even kind of jab her a little bit, going, you know, it's funny that your mind just went there, right? And I think that's just hard because we're a product of our parents. We even talk about this in our training, that many of the mindsets we have, our defaults, are the result of our upbringing. We've seen our parents deal with salespeople growing up. So even before we're adults, we already have record tracks, that is, of how to respond to salespeople or how salespeople should behave. But anyway, like we're spending our adult life repairing these things and changing our beliefs and our attitudes to be what we want to be. So you and I were talking about this right before this session, that like,
Yeah.
that's kind of what is interesting, is that we're really busy. Our careers are fast paced and we always think we don't have a lot of time, but when we take time aside for things like Sage, Inspire, and Sandler, it pays compound interest.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that insight on you. This is Real Talk with Ryan. Special guest is Brian Jackson from Sandler Training. If anyone has questions, feel free to use the chat box. I'll work those questions in. I've got several lined up already. Thank you for sending them in. Brian, you talked about letting go, talked about some of that path, but along the line, as you're moving through, every entrepreneur, and I know you're teaching this in your sales, every salesperson comes up with these obstacles. They have to meet objections, and they have to learn lessons from both things that they've seen other people do and their own mistakes. And I know you've got lessons learned. Could you share some lessons learned that have moved you along your path to get you to where you are today?
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about prior to this in sort of road mapping our discussion was the concept of taking inventory. And that in order to grow professionally, it's important to recognize and own the past, to become a student of history, your own personal history of behaviors. And I won't go into my personal life as to how that's been a huge factor in my life with my marriage and et cetera, but it's a thing that applies both personally and professionally, that when there's things, that opportunities to evolve and change, sometimes we don't like to say, oh, well, I don't do that often. Okay, well, let's look at the history. And in the case of sales, it's easy. Let's look at every deal that we've lost in the last 12 months and let's visit what was the specific reason as to why it went sideways. And you will see a pattern. But that's even more important to do in your personal life. Comes to things like anger and resentment and things like that. Taking that personal inventory is the first step.
You share with me in conversations we've had before that something that resonated with me, and I'll give you an anecdote that happened with me, and it came right out of something that you highlighted, is you look back on the way I have responded to situations or how I got to where I was, and this idea of taking inventory I've done at several moments in my life, right? Where you sit there and you look up and like, how did I get here? Why did I get here? And you start thinking that life is happening to you. And it isn't until I took inventory and said, my responses, my behaviors cause these results, and I keep doing the same thing over and over, I have to pivot. And so you highlighted that for me. And I think back in my life, I've done that a few times. How do you coach somebody when you're talking with them, or how do you do that yourself to recognize I'm the reason this result's happening? I need to change. That's a hard thing for people to find. It was hard for me to find.
There's a book I read, I highly recommend it. It's called How to Be an Adult.
How to Be an Adult.
How to Be an Adult. And I took most of my affirmations that I read often from that book. And one of them, I just pulled it. This is my list of, my go-to list. It says, I accept full responsibility for the shape my life has taken. What I do today shapes the person I'll be tomorrow. And I love that one, because, my default, for better or worse, is to, I think a lot of people the same way, is to sometimes feel sorry for myself. Like, and there's just nothing to gain from that. Part of being an adult is saying, hey, you got this bed, you got to land it. And that's cool, man, because you're going to spend less time, wasting with that negative energy, and instead exerting the positive energy moving forward.
Awesome.
I don't know, not to go on a side tangent, Ryan.
No, please.
One thing that was kind of interesting about all of that professionally is that in trying to start this company, I made many mistakes along the way, trying to cheat the system, trying to do it faster and smarter. Forget the fact that Sandler's been around 50 years and there's been 250 successful franchisees. I felt that I could probably do it smarter and faster than all the other ones. And So I tried every possible way to avoid having to do it where it was going to be way more work. And obviously, no surprise, I was humbled and realized that I needed to just stop and do it the way they told me to. And the pandemic and COVID was an interesting occurrence because what it presented to me was a clean slate, just a clean slate. I looked around and I thought, you know, everybody else now is struggling just like I am. And through this pandemic, my business is more than quadrupled in size because I didn't hold on to the past. I didn't dwell on the mistakes I made. I just said, all right, look, clean slate. Let's focus on just doing it the right way. And it's been unfortunate that all this has happened and it's not been fun for all of us, but for business, it's been exciting.
Well, it's great to hear. Again, this is Real Talk. I'm here with Brian Jackson. If anyone has comments or questions, feel free to use the chat box and I'll work them in. Also, at the end, we'll have live questions. We'll take the recording down and you can ask in live format. Brian, thank you so much for being here and for contributing so much. One of the things that I know that matters to you, that you're passionate about, as you're trying to better our community, better people who are in sales, better organizations, is that really commitment to improving the community around you. And we've had a lot of people on who have this focus on how do I elevate the community and how do I contribute? And then there's this selection process, right? That goes into what causes matter, why do those causes matter, what am I going to support, and how am I going to do about it? What am I going to do to advance it? And I know you've got a passion for elements of that. I'd love for you to take us through, and they might come from some of these other affirmations you talked about in that sheet that you printed out in the book, How to Be an Adult, through your meditation. But talk us through, share with us how you go about that selection process and what some of those groups or some of those causes, talk about why those matter to you, and we'll talk from there.
That's a tough, man, that's a big one. On a 10,000-foot level, why it matters to me is that one of the most impactful moments of my life was when I was at my grandfather's funeral, and he lived in a small town in West Texas, and there were so many people at his funeral that they had to be standing outside. There was not enough. There were not enough seats in the pews for the people who he had impacted, and I thought, man, this is how I want to be remembered. So, you know, my motives, to be very transparent, are selfish. I want to create a legacy for myself. I want to be remembered for being a good person. I want to lead by example, and I want my children and my grandchildren to be very proud of me, just like I am my grandfather. Again, I'm just being honest. It's my motives are actually quite vain and selfish when it comes to why I want to help others. But my causes that I'm passionate about are, I would list three. One is the other shoulder, the YMCA. I'm very, very passionate about camping with the adventure clubs. We used to be called the Indian Guides. And it's for dads to camp with their daughters and or sons. And I've just in fact, if I was to list my top 10 best memories of my life, at least 5 of them would have to do with camping with my boys through the YMCA. So love that program, and I try to help the YMCA any way I can.
Love it.
The second cause would be, and it's not something that I've had the bandwidth to help with yet, but my intention is to eventually get more involved with, I wouldn't say ministering, but just helping with people who are in prison. I just relate on a Johnny Cash level to that plight, that concept of a human being, you know, in prison. You know, it's not that they don't belong there, and we don't get into that, but it's like I have a soft spot in my heart for that situation. And then the third cause is, and we've talked about this, it's racial inequality. And, you know, we talked earlier about taking inventory. Ryan. One of the sort of ways that that is applicable to this topic of racial inequality, the concept of taking inventory, is that history is critical when it comes to, and knowing our history is critical for our country to heal when it comes to racial inequality. And I might have mentioned this to you that I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I spent my formative years there, and fairly recently I found out about this Tulsa race massacre that happened back in the 1920s, I think, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I didn't know that that was real. I thought that it was actually a fiction. I remember I watched this TV show, The Watchmen, and I saw this event on the TV show, and I had no idea that this massacre had actually happened in real life. I called my mom, and she's like, I'd never heard of this. Like, and it just turns out that history buried this event for better part of a century, which is crazy to me, right? In our modern society, that we didn't know about something so so hugely impactful. So, you know, the way that, anyway, I feel like there's a lot to be gained and learned about our history when it comes to the real history of our country and as it relates to racial inequality. I know that my mother's maiden name is Wilson, and my last name is Jackson. I've always looked up to figures like Andrew Jackson and Woodrow Wilson. What I didn't know until recent months is that Andrew Jackson made his money from trading slaves, and Woodrow Wilson was the person that brought segregation to Princeton. Okay, well, you know, my paradigm has just been rocked from these events of learning about Tulsa, learning about Andrew Jackson, learning about Woodrow Wilson. So, you know, as an adult, I do want to take responsibility and do my part for society, for our community, and try to help out any way I can. And I have a forum where I can do that with, you know, offering people access to my product and helping them in their careers.
How would someone who is looking for that kind of training find you, reach out to you? What would that process look like so you can make that kind of contribution to their well-being?
Yeah, and I thank you for asking. So, yeah, you know, so we talked about this before too. Do you mind if I share my selfish motives and why I do that? Because everything I do has an underlying.
Please.
You see a theme here.
We already established that you are sane and only after your legacy, right?
Right. Well, you know, people often question, why would you offer me a free seat in your training, Brian? What's to gain from it? And the truth is that when I bring on corporate clients that are paying to have their salespeople come to my training, those employees are oftentimes sort of hostages in my rooms. They don't want to be there. They're there because their company is making them be there. So if I can balance that with some people that want to be there, that feel privileged to be there, that are taking advantage of an opportunity to gain access to this content that can have a major impact on their career, they have a positive attitude about it, that actually helps me, because that positivity is contagious and it helps me convert those hostages into enthusiastic clients. So I mean it sincerely and I do the same thing for, I'm highly active in the North County Chamber. I volunteer for their Operation Connect, where we help with veterans that are transitioning out of the military. So I offer complimentary training to them, and we bring students from that into my program at no cost who are considering careers in sales. I've offered this to UCSD and other sometimes nonprofits. In fact, we had two PWI and, well, I wouldn't call the National City Chamber a nonprofit, but we had folks in, again, at no charge, because we're giving back to the community. And you know, the way that those folks have impacted the training positively with their contributions, their participation, it's a win-win. So, but as far as how to get that word out, it's just from word of mouth. That's part of why I'm doing this, Ryan, is to get that word out there, that if there's people that I can help, I certainly want to help them. And I hope that we can, getting back to the whole issue of racial inequality, I really want to especially, that's my way of giving back to the community when it comes to, Black people in our community, is making sure that if there's folks that could benefit from what I do, I want to offer that to them.
Thank you for making those kinds of skill training available. So often we struggle with this in our business, disadvantaged businesses, and that whether they're minorities or not, there's just such a large segment of small businesses who are relatively ignored by the people that have the training and have the tools that they can help them provide to advance. And they're ignored because they just don't have the budgets. They're not the companies that are paying all this money. They're not, you talked about the hospital sales where you're selling these large POs, playing with monopoly money or fake money, or not somebody actually saying, I'm going to give you my money to learn for me.
Yeah.
It's a much different scenario. So thank you for being mindful of that and not abandoning the cause for purely profit. And I agree that profit can come at a greater level because you commit back to the community, but a lot of times that's ignored by so many. So on behalf of everyone who is impacted positively by that offering, we all thank you. I'm here, this is Real Talk with Ryan. I'm here with Brian Jackson from Sandler Training. If anyone has any other questions on chat, you can use the box. I'll work them in. Also, we'll have live questions at the end. Couple last questions before we go to live questions, Brian. Thank you so much for being so open with your history and with your perspective. It certainly gives us all some neat takeaways. I'd like to revisit the affirmations, right? You read one of them. And I selfishly think about this for me, because that's a really good one. And then I'm like, oh, I want more of those. But I'm not going to ask you to read a bunch of affirmations. I'm going to ask a different question and hope that I get some. Okay? So many of us look at what we have going on in our life and we lose track of what success should look like, right? You mentioned a little bit about comparing my life to this person's stuff and their stuff to that person's stuff and my weather to theirs. And right, you have this constant comparison. And in those affirmations, I'm expecting that you are using those to measure long-term success. And what are some of the tools that you use to say, yes, I've met some of those goals. Yes, I'm advancing towards my legacy. Yes, I accomplished what this affirmation said to. How do you do that and keep score for you?
You said it, keep score. Yeah. You nailed it at the end. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, you might, like, this might not answer your question. Here's the thing with me. I've never needed to keep score. I've never had to balance my checkbook because I always overwork, overdeliver, and it just happens. I mean, I'm just a workaholic and I'm competitive, so like I just don't have to worry about that. What I have to worry about is my happiness and my my balance in life. So, look, my long-term goals are there. I really try not to think too much about that. My goals are the more important goals that I have are just the ones, it's very simple. What do I got to do to make through today? What do I got to do to make through, in some cases like today, what do I got to do this morning? What's the next indicated step? And be in the moment, because that's where memories are created. Memories are created in the moment. So especially when I'm around my daughter, I've got to just focus on like setting aside an hour or a minute or 5 minutes just to be there with her and truly engage and be present. Doesn't that sound simple? It's not simple for me. I don't know why, but that's not easy for me and it's not simple for me. So that's all I can do is just one day at a time and one moment at a time and just be present and experience things. I think that as long as we have breath, we have something to be grateful for. You know what I'm saying? As long as we have a breath, we have something to be grateful for.
Well, I like that. It certainly adds perspective that's often forgotten. And I've heard people talk about stress, right? And you're dealing with stress, which is generally self-created, and stress can be very useful. Stress can be very harmful, and striking a balance between the two is sometimes very complicated. But stress is generally the concern for what happened yesterday or the fear of what might happen tomorrow, but it's generally not about the moment.
Right. And something just to kind of tack on to that though, Ryan, is like when I'm meeting with clients and we are trying to drill down KPIs of how we're going to track, how we're going to measure, my stance on that is this: KPIs, measurable goals, they need to be simple and they need to be very attainable, like minimum standard. Because what I want to see my clients do is achieve a streak that there is no excuse to not break, or no excuse to break, and that you can feel good about taking for a month straight, and to have that streak go, that's more important than setting high, like my tendency has always been to set really high goals and to end each day going, oh man, I didn't get it. And it's just a beat down every single day. So I said, let's say, take an example of cold calling. Obviously nobody likes making cold calls. So when I started doing this, I would set a goal of 75 calls a day or 100 calls a day. And every day I'd end feeling mostly very disappointed. Instead, I'd set a goal of 5 calls a day, where if I just start the dials, if I have the time, I will obviously make more. It's just like the hardest thing about going to the gym is just going to the gym. The only way you can fail with prospecting is to not prospect. So the goal, the purpose of the goal is just to get the wheels moving and to get you doing it and consistent with doing it, not to, under any circumstances, beat you down. But there's complementary quantity type goals, or KPIs, I should say, that go in balance with that. Like, how many actual appointments are you setting? How many of those are converting to second meetings, et cetera. But it's important to first have those good KPIs that give you the pat on the back every day,
Very nice. No, I agree. We talk about it in terms of like celebrating small successes. It doesn't mean that, you celebrate like that's the last success you ever were going to have, or you've reached the mountaintop and there's no more mountains to climb. But I've also worked places, and I know most people have, where the goalposts constantly get moved.
Mm-hmm.
Right before going into the end zone line moves another 20 yards and another 20 yards. And the goal is to never let anyone achieve success because somehow they'll settle. I just don't find that that's necessarily true of most people.
When I was struggling in starting this company, and I consulted a lot of older, wiser mentors, they all cautioned me. They said, Brian, when you're climbing the mountain, it's steep, and when you're climbing it, when you're looking, all you see is rock. You just see rock until you get to the top. And if you only really take time to enjoy the scenery when you get to the top, just imagine that. You get to the top, you look around, you say, what now? And that's what happens with a lot of men and women who retire, and they get there and they're like, well, this sucks. This is boring. Where's the excitement? Like, the view looks nice for a little while, but the point is that you want to, and then Larry, I don't know what facial expression that is you're making there. I don't know what that means. But the point is that you want to enjoy the scenery along the way. You want to enjoy the view on the journey.
Yeah. I know I struggle with moving so fast that I forget to look. And I'll use an example for me. Is a couple times I've had the privilege of getting to go take batting practice at Petco Park on the field, which, is not that big of a deal really. But the first time you go, you're swinging so hard, trying to show everyone watching how hard you can hit the ball.
Yeah.
And then you get out and it's over in a flash, and then you realize no one's watching.
Mm-hmm.
No one cares, right? And no one remembers, because you don't remember a single other person that hit the ball either, because you weren't watching them.
Yep.
So the second time you go, you want to say, okay, I'm going to take inventory of where I'm at, just like you said. And you fall right back into what if someone's watching, right? And so you get right back into it. The third time you go, I was like, you know what? I don't care if I see 3 pitches. I'm going to look at myself on the screen. I'm going to stand here and look around. I'm going to hold my hand up and say, just give me a second here.
Uh-huh.
You're playing the song I asked you to play. I'm on the big screen with my name there. I'm on the diamond here. There's 1,000 people on the field right now. this is pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
It doesn't matter
Right.
that no one's watching. And so
Yeah.
I resonate with that, what you just described, because most of life is, I'm going to hit it so hard and hope people are watching, and nobody is.
You know, Ryan, and it's cool because like just recently, I mean, literally in the last couple of months, I've started to wake up and knowing that I've got to do several trainings that day, I've said, you know, this is going to be fun. This is going to be a lot of fun. Like so I'm on this journey of life, and every day these sorts of lessons are becoming more real.
Thank you, Brian. Last question. Appreciate you being here. This is Brian Jackson from Sandler Training on Real Talk with Ryan, and we'll open up for questions. What's next for Brian Jackson and Sandler Training?
What's next? Oh man. Okay. Well, here's something that's next. We're starting a management forum. You know, we're familiar with organizations like Sage that are for executives, owners, business owners of companies. And obviously we have our sales training program for salespeople, but we're starting a sales management forum. It's going to be once a month, and it's going to be really exciting. What's exciting for me about it is that I've got a few paying clients that are needing it, and that's why I'm putting it together. But I'm also inviting a lot of people who I've known throughout my career through sales leadership that I haven't really had a way to leverage those relationships. And I'm offering them all, you know, charter seats to be kind of charter members. And I have no doubt that those are going to result in outstanding referral sources. Again, everything that I do has selfish motives, Ryan.
Thank you, Brian. We'll look forward to seeing that from Sandler coming soon. We all appreciate the contribution you make to the community, the expertise that you deliver to people trying to learn how to fish, and not just following rules and protocols, but actually learning how to survive, thanks to some of the principles you teach us with. And then just a reminder of living in a state of gratitude, thinking about abundance, and taking inventory of where we are certainly gives us some grounding and perspective. So Brian Jackson, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to what's going to happen soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.